Welcome to this episode of Out of the Best Books, the podcast where we deep dive into classic literature and have conversations about what we've learned and discovered along the way. We love all things books and reading, and we want to share our love of the classics with you. We hope to inspire you to read along with us and join in the conversation. I'm Laura.
And I'm Amity. Let's get started. Okay, first of all, my hair is doing strange things today. I don't even know. I don't know.
At least you have hair.
Gosh, whatever. Your hair looks good.
I don't have enough to do strange things.
Okay, so we are jumping into the last 4 chapters of The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. So chapter 9 is a very different chapter. We've talked about before about how sort of like each chapter is its like everything is linked together, but each chapter is almost like its own little vignette, like an almost separate story.
Until you get to the end.
What's
like,
that?
I feel like at the end it's different, but
yeah, you're right. Those ones are very much.
But this is definitely separate, I think.
Yes, it is. So we're zeroing in on Rat, and it talks about, so chapter 9 is called Wayfarers All, and it talks about how he's very restless. And it's just like he needs a change, which is very unusual because all throughout the book, we learn about how much he loves the river. It's everything to him. He doesn't even have a desire to go anyplace else. He loves sailing and he loves his home and his neighbors, and he just loves everything about where he lives. And so suddenly he's kind of restless. It says in here, nature's grand hotel has its season like the others. And it sort of takes nature and turns it into this grand hotel where there's people who come and they stay, and they've come from all over the world, and they stay and they love it. And then at the end of the season, they pack up and they leave. One gets unsettled, depressed, and inclined to be querulous. Why this craving for change? And it's really alluding to migration, right? For animals. And Rat does not migrate. Usually rodents will hibernate, but they don't migrate.
Yeah, so, it says, I like this. The rat was a self-sufficing sort of animal rooted to the land, and whoever went, he stayed. Still, he could not help noticing what was in the air and feeling some of its influence in his bones. So, like, he doesn't ever go anywhere.
Right. But even though he doesn't go anywhere, he's feeling that sort of need for change, the need to go someplace, especially when he sees all these other animals doing that. It says it was difficult to settle down to anything seriously with all this flitting going on.
Sounded like anxiety to me.
Yeah, totally. So he's like wandering in the fields, and it says here he often loved to wander through the forest of stiff, strong stalks that carried their own golden sky away over his head. A sky that was always dancing, shimmering, softly talking, or swaying strongly to the passing wind and recovering itself with a toss and a merry laugh. And here he gets to talk to the field mice. And they're like, hey, come help us. And Rat is like, well, what games are you up to? And they're like, well, we don't have time for games right now because we're getting ready for our hibernation. But when we're done, we can probably play. And he's like, aren't you kind of early this year? And the thing about any kind of rodent, any kind of bird, any kind of animal, they have instincts for these things. They know when they need to start, and they don't stop until they're done. And I think that they even say, well, we just decided to start a little bit early this year. And so Rat's really disappointed. He's like, I want you guys to come go on a picnic with me. And they just say, well, no, we've got to get this done. So everything is changing on him. And there's no, string of similarity, no string of consistency. So he's just really, really restless.
Yeah, I like that. He says the rats or the mice say, the best flats get picked up so quickly nowadays, and if you're late, you have to put up with anything.
Yeah.
So that's why they wanted to get a head start. They didn't want to get the last pick.
Right. They wanted to be ahead of the game. And so.
And they said, we know that we're early. We're just getting a start here.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And so that kind of tells you that maybe like the population of animals that needs a place to hunker down has increased. And so um they have to adapt, right? So he goes back to his river and sits down. And while he's there, the swallows come by. And of course, the swallows they're going to be leaving for sure. And they're talking about the route they're going to take. And they're telling Rat, well, half the fun is deciding what route we're going to take. Although birds don't really have much of a choice. They just have their migration path. And Rat's like, how is that fun? I don't understand that. If you've got to leave this pleasant place and your friends who will miss you and your snug homes that you've just settled into, why, when the hour strikes, I have no doubt you'll go bravely and face all the trouble and discomfort and change and newness and make believe that you're not very unhappy. But to want to talk about it or even think about it, and the swallows are like, no, it does make us happy to go. This is who we are. And it's just not who Rat is. And it's hard for him to understand that, just the huge differences in these instincts and these urgings. They talk about how they feel this stirring and they need to go. And Rat even asks them, he's like, well, couldn't you like not do that for a year? And they tell the story, and I'm not even going to look at the book, so hopefully I get it right, but they tell about how one time one of their friends tried to do that. One of their friends was like, I don't really want to go. I'm going to try to just stay here for for the winter. And it did not work out for him well at all. It hadn't even been much length of time at all. I think maybe like a week or something. And the swallow was like, oh my gosh, he had to go. It was like physically pulling on him. He had to migrate. And at that point, he's pretty much by himself. And so it was much harder migration because he didn't go with his group. But yeah, just the point that like you can't change nature.
Yeah.
You can't change who you are and what your instincts are. So
Yeah, he said he was like, he tried to stay and it just got cold and depressing. He's like, so eventually I just left. And I love that they kind of talk about how the birds, that's when they connect, is when they're flying south.
mhm.
So they kind of inquire, what it said, like inquire of each other and they compare notes. And anyway, so they kind of, that's their connection. And but Rat and his friends sit around the fire during the winter. So
Yeah,
that's his connection. That's why he doesn't have to leave. That's what they do.
right.
I
Right.
love
They
it.
all have their way. Here's a thought that I had. So I wrote down, well, I had a couple of thoughts. First of all, they talk about the call of the South, the call of the South. And of course that's where they're going. And these guys are in England. So do they go like how far south do they go? We know where they go
Here.
when they're flying south in America. What was that?
Here, we know where they go, like from
Yeah, we know their migration paths here. And was actually going to look it up, but I didn't. But I really am kind of curious, like, do they go as far south as like Italy? I mean, because like most of those countries in Europe have pretty intense winters as far as I know. I don't know. But I think that Italy is significantly warmer, especially right there on the edge of the Mediterranean. I don't know.
yeah, how far
So
do they go? I always thought when we learned about this in school, like where the birds would go, we live in the Pacific Northwest, or I do, where they would go. I was like, that's a long ways.
it's a long way.
Like,
Yeah. And so it may be totally conceivable for them to go to the very southern tips of Europe, even into like North Africa. Like, I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know. But um, yeah, super interesting. So here's a note that I wrote down here though. And just wrote that this is talking about those who go and those who stay, and both are doing the correct thing for them. Neither of them is wrong. Their needs are just very different, and their brains are wired according to their needs. This is all very basic. So here's the question though, because a lot of times we read these and we're like, okay, well, let's apply them to us. can there be different needs within the same species? Like, of course there are to an extent, but like, all the birds fly south, where all the rodents hibernate. They don't migrate, right? What are things that all the humans do and things that we cannot do differently from each other? Do you know what I'm saying? Is that kind of a weird question? It's kind of a weird question, but of course, as individuals, we have individual needs, but there are things as humans that we all have to do. I mean, obviously, there's things like we all have to sleep, we all have to eat.
Those are the things that came to my mind. Like, well, I have to sleep. You can't get around it.
We all have to do those things.
Yeah, I mean, that's like our little migration, right? Or not migration, like our, what do you call it? Hibernation. And we kind of, I think, naturally hibernate in the winter when it's cold.
Well, and I personally think we should be hibernating, like actually hibernating. So
Yeah.
I think I think that part of our problems as humans is that we are fighting nature. We are not sleeping enough in the winter because I'm like, what? For what other reason is it so dark and we're all so tired and it's so cold? It's not like, yeah, let's go do stuff out in the cold. No, it's like, find your little hovel, stay warm, and just go to sleep.
And I think we kind of do naturally do that, right? When the weather starts getting better, then we start wanting to be outside and like planting our gardens or whatever. Yeah. But I read that somewhere that it's funny that we do this New Year right in the middle of winter when we're freezing and like our tendency is to want to go inward, be in the house, be warm. And yet we're like making all these goals and trying to be more productive. And that's like against our natural tendencies. I don't know.
It really is. And it does make me go, maybe we all need to be paying attention to and maybe this sounds super kind of granola, but like paying attention to the seasons and paying attention to what our natural inclinations are during those seasons and going, maybe we need to like lean into that a lot more because really that's probably the healthiest thing for us at the time. I know like whenever spring hits, when you're talking about, it's kind of crazy that we're making these resolutions for the new year. I think it is crazy. I feel that urge at springtime. Like springtime, I'm like, new life, new me. I want to plant a garden, I want to get outside and begin new things. Like that is my urge. In the new year, I just want to sleep.
Yes. That's one thing I learned during COVID was that I really like to sleep. I was like, all of a sudden I had no, I run a home business, so I had no job. Like it just shut down. And I was able to go to bed when I wanted to go to bed and get up when I wanted to get up and go on walks when I was like,
yeah,
this is actually the dream.
Yeah.
I mean, it was and it wasn't, right? We also watched a lot of TV and ate a lot of junk food and whatever. But like all of a sudden I was like, I need sleep. Like I feel so much better when I mean, honestly, if I could choose, I would be in bed at 9 o'clock every night.
Yeah.
I love to sleep at night and get up early in the morning. And like, I want to wake up naturally at 5:30 in the morning, not
right.
But, and like some nights, if our 5-year-old goes to bed earlier, I'll be like to my husband, can we go to bed? And he's always like, already? I'm like, yeah, it's like almost 9.
I'm absolutely. And especially when the winter, when at 9 o'clock, it's been dark for like 4 hours. So it feels really late.
Yeah. So like
Makes
last
sense
night,
to me.
I laid down with Presley and I fell asleep at 9.
Oh,
I was like,
wonderful.
sorry.
Good.
Sorry. I feel bad though when I do that, but I'm like, every once in a while I need to. But that would be my preference is get enough sleep, especially in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I just never feel like I need it as much in the summer.
Yeah.
More
energy, maybe.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, well, okay. So carrying on, Rat he just doesn't get it, right? And so he's like, if you love it here so much, why would you go? And then he's like, okay, but so if that call is so strong, why would you ever come back? And the swallow says, well, that call is just as strong. Like when it's time to come back, we have to come back. We can't stay where we were. We have to come back here. So just super interesting conversation there. And then Rat goes and he kind of sits by himself, and then he hears footsteps and he looks up and there is this creature coming towards him. And for me, the jury's out about whether this is a real creature or if it's sort of like his dream self in a way, because it seems it is a rat, but it says he's lean and keen featured. He's sort of wearing like raggedy clothes. It's interesting. He adds the detail that he's wearing small golden earrings in his little ears. And he's totally dressed like a sailor. And this guy, this little stranger, he comes and sits right next to him. And
he has a stick with a cotton, like his stuff is tied up in a handkerchief.
Yeah. Yeah. It's obvious that he's a little traveler. So he sits down by Rat and he just kind of starts talking. He notices all the sounds and the smells and the sights as they're sitting there along the river. He smells the clover and he hears the cows eating grass, and he says to Rat, "It's a goodly life that you lead, friend. No doubt the best in the world, if only you are strong enough to lead it." Which is an interesting thing to say, isn't it? And Rat says, "Yes, it's the life, the only life to live." And the stranger was like, "Well, I didn't say that exactly. I said it's like good life. No doubt the best in the world, but it's not the only life." Right? And so
yeah, because he'd just been experiencing it for 6 months, like the old rat.
Yes. Yeah, he'd been on a farm for 6 months. But before that, and so then we jump into the sea rat's story. And he says that he originally came from Constantinople. And the thing is, as he's talking, I'm like, are you like 700 years old? Because that's kind of how he tells his story. It's like, it's very historical in nature. When he talks about, well, Constantinople, and then Sigurd, the king of Norway, how he sailed thither with 60 ships, and how he and his men rode up through streets all canopied in their honor with purple and gold. The emperor and the empress, and he talks about the Northmen. So usually Northmen refers to Vikings, but that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. And but they are talking about Norwegians, so maybe they just call the Norwegians the Northmen too. He just talks about coming up like all the coasts of like all the different countries. Well, and this was interesting too, because Water Rat was like, "Oh, so you've been on lots of big voyages. You were, quite the seafaring rat." And he's like, "No, I actually just stay pretty close to home." And not close to home, but I like staying pretty close to the coast. I like to have land within my sight. So basically, he likes to be on the ships that are just like transporting goods up the coast so that he can always see the land. And so he has this story. He's like, well, this story will be a good example of everything. Okay. I did actually try to write down some notes that I could follow it pretty well. So it says, he began at Constantinople, basically in Turkey. He headed to the Grecian islands and the Levant. They went up the Adriatic Sea. He spent some time in Venice, in Italy. There, he experienced the gondolas, the music, the feasting, and went along the Grand Canal at night. Then they went south down the Italian coast to Palermo and Sicily, and then back up to Sardinia and Corsica. So he's just like all over the place. And he talks about how he never sticks to too long to one ship. he's like, if you stay on a ship for too long, you get too narrow-minded and prejudiced. Like, you need to get out and you need to see a lot more. You need to experience other ships, be with other sailors, other people.
This is very true.
It is very true. There's a lot of truth to everything that he's saying.
I kind of think that with like reading,
Yes.
that it's so important. I mean, we can't really go places, right? But reading, when we stick to like, say you only read mysteries or like, you know what I mean? We need to read all kinds of literature and learn about all kinds of people, and then we become I don't know, better, more well-rounded, but more compassionate, more anyways.
Definitely. Just a greater perspective on life in general. And of course, it's better if you can experience it in person, but there's so much that you just can't. Like, you can't go back in history and experience things, but you can read an incredibly written book about it that's credibly sourced and put yourself in the shoes of the characters and have great empathy for, well, sympathy for that. And yeah, there's so much that you can do. And to your point, it is really important to try many different kinds of books. And I think books that are often nonfiction or historical fiction based on fiction, based on true things, especially the ones that there's only fiction in them because there's parts of the story we simply don't know. But like, so much of it really is true. It's not just like some, I don't know, fluffy royal that never actually existed in a kingdom that maybe existed, but like nothing about that is true. But it was set like 700 years ago. That's not historical fiction to me. It's just, it needs to be a real story just with parts of it fictionalized. Anyway, that was a long rant to say, yes, it's good to try lots of different things. So, let's see. Yeah, so he was like on the shores of Italy for quite a while, and then he made his way up to France, and anyway, and then he talks about how from France he made his way up to England and this little farm where he'd been for the past 6 months. And now we kind of get the idea that he's headed back to the sea. But because of all these things that he's talking about, like different food that he's eaten, different places he's been, Rat is like, oh, well, I'm going to go put together a picnic. And of course, in very, this is Rat-like, characteristic Rat is what I should say. He's very thoughtful. And so he includes a yard of long French bread, a sausage, very garlicky sausage, some strong cheese, and a flask containing bottled sunshine shed and garnered on far southern slopes. So he's very thoughtful in packing the food because he's like, this is stuff that this guy would appreciate. So as they're taking their meal, eating, the sea rat, he continues to tell all these stories. And it really puts Rat into a funk. If ever he has been in a funk, I'm going to kind of skip forward a little bit.
And he's like spellbound, first of all. And
completely.
Then probably feeling like, oh, I don't do anything.
I know, exactly. The sea rat, he's like, I'm on my way. I'm going to, basically the sea is calling and I must answer. And in fact, he kind of encourages Rat to come with him. In fact, this is the part that I was like, is this even a real rat, or is this our friend Rat kind of imagining it? Because here's what he says to him, the sea rat. He says, you will come too, young brother. The days pass and never return, and the south still waits for you. Take the adventure, heed the call now ere the irrevocable moment passes. And later on he says, you can easily overtake me on the road, for you are young and I am aging and go softly. I will linger and look back, and at last I will surely see you coming, eager and lighthearted, and with all the south in your face. And then it says the voice died away and ceased, And the water rat, paralyzed and staring, saw at last but a distant speck on the white surface of the road. It was almost like
He disappeared.
he disappeared.
Yeah.
Exactly. Almost as if he wasn't even there. But it did the trick, and it totally put him in a crazy funk. And Mole comes and finds him, and because he's starting to pack his bags. He's like ready to go. And Mole is like, what are you doing? And Rat's like, I'm going to go south with everybody else. And
Like he's in a trance, right?
Yeah, he's totally in a trance.
I mean, he's just like, it says he does everything mechanically. And he just looks like he's not there. Like it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mole's
Yeah,
like, there's something wrong here.
Yeah, totally. And this is where this story is just so really wonderful, tender, and sweet, because when Mole needed help in the beginning, Mole was very young and naive and inexperienced, and Rat was there to help him, and he helped him grow and mature. And now Mole is at the point that he can turn around and do the same thing for Rat, because Rat is not naive, but he needs help. He needs an outside mature influence to help him be like, this is not what you should be doing, you know? And that's what a true friend does. And I think that this is an excellent portrayal of true friendship, because especially Rat and Mole, they are true friends to each other throughout the whole thing. They're there for each other, they help each other, and they will tell each other the truth, even when it's hard to hear. Mole, like, he stays there with Rat. He's very concerned, but he's like convinces him to stop packing, just sit down for a little bit. And
I love that he locks up the satchel. So he puts him in a chair and he takes the satchel and he locks it up. And then he says, and he sat down quietly on the table by his friend, waiting for the strange seizure to pass.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's fair, because that really kind of was what it was. And so he just busies himself about the house. He starts talking to him about different things. But before that, Mole observes that Rat has seemed to have lost all interest for the time in the things that went to make up his daily life, as well as in all pleasant forecastings of the altered days and doings that the changing season was surely bringing. And I think that that is also an accurate portrayal of a lot of times how people feel in the winter, particularly, even though this isn't winter, this is more like late autumn. But you kind of, a lot of people experience sort of a feeling of hopelessness and like, why even plan for anything? You know, there's not really anything to look forward to. I think especially after Christmas, Matt,
Yes.
I've told you, like, my Matthew, he loves Christmas so much. He started playing his Christmas music in September. He looked forward to it so much. And he's just like so enthusiastic with like everything that we do. Such a happy guy. But then after Christmas, he's like, there's like nothing to look forward to.
Yeah. I totally feel the same way.
Yeah. And it's hard. It's like he spends a lot of time playing basketball. But we just have to keep like structure and, plan things, because he's got to have something to look forward to. And I think that's how humans are in general. Like, of course, it's important to be happy in the present moment, but it's also important to have things to look forward to.
Yeah. So I wrote down that question. What do you do when you get bored with daily life? Like, do you set goals? I don't know what I do. I mean, sometimes I'll be like, we need a trip. We need to go away for a couple of nights and just break up this monotony or whatever. But that's pretty much the only thing I can think of. Maybe I'll try to find something new to watch on TV. I don't know. What do you do when you get bored?
I can't say that I've experienced boredom necessarily. Sometimes, and maybe like the monotony.
Yeah.
Can
I'm never bored.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like there's no way you have time to be bored. I don't have time to be bored. But sometimes the monotony gets hard. And I will say that at this specific season in my life, I can't think about taking a trip because we can't. And that just kind of depresses me, and then I start crying. So I can't think about that. So,
And by trip, I mean we could just go on a Saturday and drive to the coast.
sure.
It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be and when I say trip, it's not a big trip. Maybe
Sure.
it's,
Well, yeah, no,
yeah.
I know. Yeah.
Okay.
But
But you could go on a picnic on a Saturday, or I guess what I would do is plan something fun for the weekend, like a fun activity, or
yes.
I don't know,
Well,
maybe a day to read.
yeah, and I usually have such a long list of things that I would like to do if I had time, that it's like, in order to break up the monotony, I'm like, well, I'm going to do something on that list, because even if I don't actually have time, because that will just change things up for
Yeah.
me. And anyway, and honestly, like, my favorite thing to do is just gather everybody around and curl up and read books together or play games. And so that helps me a lot. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not very exciting. So
Me neither. I'm like, oh, how do you break up the monotony? Oh, I clean. No, or organize something. That does help.
it
Sometimes I'll just
does.
clean out my car, and then I'm like, every time I get in the car, I'm like, oh, it's so nice.
Yeah.
So pretty.
Yeah. And also for me, just having a running list of things that are because maybe we can't go on a trip, but just having a running list of things that are possibilities to do around town that are not expensive. And it's like, okay, guys, we're just going to go to the swimming pool today. It may be 7 degrees outside, but that's fine. It's an indoor pool. Mole. And it's also important to surround ourselves with good friends who pull us out of our slumps.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Mole does for Rat. He very carefully talks about he talks about the harvest and all the reddening apples,
Yes.
the browning nuts, the jams and preserves, and all those things, they can't help but bring some joy. And after a while, Rat sits up and starts joining in. And by the end of the chapter, it says that Mole, he took occasion to leave the room, and when he peeped in again sometime later, the rat was absorbed and deaf to the world, alternately scribbling and sucking the top of his pencil. So one of the things he did was he loved to write, and Mole was like, I need to get him back to writing, and then he's going to be fine. And it says it was joy to the Mole to know that the cure had at least begun. So anyway, it is a very different chapter, but I think it's one that really helps us to talk about our human experience a lot, and about friendship, and anyway, a lot of things. It is good to travel. It's also good to be happy at home.
Yeah. So, it gets really fun. This chapter 10. I don't know. I like these last 3 chapters. I know.
Yes.
It's kind of funny.
Because really, this is sort of like the beginning of the end.
Yes.
And it's just.
So if you remember, Toad had escaped, right? And he had been on that train, and he jumped off the train and fallen asleep in a tree. So this chapter is called The Further Adventures of Toad. And Toad is hysterical, so out of touch with who he is and reality, and I love it.
Funny. Can I put in something really quickly right here? Because I think for me, it changed the way I read the rest of the book. So something I learned, and you had mentioned it before, is that Kenneth Grahame wrote these stories, told these stories originally to his son, Alistair. But what I didn't realize until I was reading a little more about it was that Toad his character is based on Alistair.
That's not good.
But at the same time, I was like, oh my gosh, he's so little boyish, toddlerish almost. And that's probably really what it is. It's just this little adventurous little boy that you're never gonna learn. You do.
They're constantly trying to rein him in.
Yes. Constantly trying to rein him. And yet they keep doing things that you're like, oh, why did you just jump off the roof? Or whatever else they're doing that.
I love it.
So
yes,
moving forward.
The further adventures of Toad. So, like he said, he'd escaped. now he jumped off the train and he's sleeping in the hollow of a tree, and he wakes up and his toes are cold. And he had dreamed that his blankets had gone downstairs to warm up. Which is so funny because you have those dreams in the morning and like something physically is happening to you and your mind makes up a reason for it. Like,
Totally.
feet are cold. Well, my blankets must have went downstairs.
Yeah. And that sounds like such a little kid dream.
Yes.
Anyways.
And then Toad is like, oh yeah, I'm free. He remembers what had happened. But he remembers what has happened. So he like basically, I think he gets up and starts moving, right? He's like, I gotta get home. And the road, this is so funny. The road meets a canal, and Toad sees in the canal a horse that is pulling a barge with a stout woman on it. And he apparently doesn't like stout women because they talk about this a lot in here. And I just think that is one of the like signs of this time that this book was written. And the woman says to him, good morning. And Toad answers, and he says, it would be a good morning if I wasn't in sore trouble, which he carries on this story that he had concocted before, right? About he's dressed like a washerwoman. And he says, here's my married daughter. Let's see. I dare say it is a nice morning to them that's not in sore trouble, like what I am. Here's my married daughter. She sends off to me post haste to come to her at once. So off I comes, not knowing what may be happening or going to happen, but fearing the worst, as you will understand, if you're a mother too. And then he talks about how he's left his children at home and they're probably being super naughty and he doesn't have any money. And he tells her that his daughter is living near Toad Hall because he's trying to figure out how to get there. So she says she's going that way. Would he like a ride? And constantly through these last 3 chapters, he talks about like, there I go again. I did it. I outsmarted them.
He's so impressed with himself.
Yes, everything. He's so impressed. He says, I always come out on top. And then because he's dressed like a washerwoman, she asks him about his washing business. And I think his problem is he just takes it too far. Like every time.
Every time.
Yes. He tells her he does everything himself. Like I do all the washing, ironing, clear starching. Everything's done under my own eye. I watch it all. And she's like, you do it all yourself? You can't do it all yourself. And he says that he has 20 girls working for him, those nasty little hussies.
No, it's like, wow, quite the little detail.
Yeah. And then he's like, that's what I call them. Nasty little hussies. Oh, I love this. Let's see. Then he goes on again too far, saying how much he loves washing. He says, I simply dote on it. Never so happy as when I've got both arms in the wash tub. But then it comes so easy to me. No trouble at all. A real pleasure. The woman says she also loves washing, but her husband is a shirker, which is funny, which means that he tries to get out of work. And so basically she has to do his work. And so she can't wash her clothes. So he avoids
because it becomes apparent that like the barge is their line of business, but he's never there to help with the barge. She's always the one doing it.
Yep.
He's supposed to be out there doing it and she's doing it.
Yeah. He says that he's always trying to avoid work. So she has to run the barge. And so she doesn't have time to do her washing. And then Toad tries to change the subject. He's like, oh, never mind about the washing. And she had told the story about how her husband was out hunting for rabbit for them for dinner. And so then he's trying to turn her attention to this rabbit. He's like, try and fix your mind on that rabbit. A nice, fat, young rabbit. I'll be bound. Got any onions? So yeah, he tries to change the subject and he has no luck. So then she asks him to wash her underwear. And I love the way I can't remember how he puts it, but you have to like kind of read between the lines to know that she's asking him to wash her underwear. Yes. She calls him, if you'll just take 1 or 2 of the most necessary sort. Yes. So that's what she's talking about, her underwear. And you'll see him and just put them through the wash because he likes to wash so much, then he wouldn't mind doing this. And then he asks her if he can steer.
Like, he's like, I might not do it the way you like. I'm used to gentlemen's things, even though this
Yes.
is what I do all day, every day, and I do everything, and I direct 20 girls. How about I steer instead and you do it?
Yeah. She's like, no. And so now there's no way out of this. He has to wash her. So he gathers up all the supplies, a couple of her garments, and he tries to remember what he has seen other people do through windows when they're washing stuff.
Yeah.
So he's washing the stuff, right? And 30 minutes go by and he keeps dropping the soap and nothing is getting cleaner. Anyways, so he keeps dropping the soap, nothing's getting clean. His paws are getting wrinkly, which he hates because he's like upper class, right? Like his paws shouldn't be wrinkly. And he swears when it says he muttered under his breath words that should never pass the lips of either washerwoman, women, or toads, and lost the soap for the 50th time. And so basically this whole time, and he keeps looking at her and she's not watching him, but she is watching him.
She's totally watching him.
Pretending that she's not watching him, but she had been. And then she tells him, well, she starts laughing, right? She's laughing so hard that she's crying. And she says, I've been watching you all the time. I thought you must be a humbug all along from the conceited way you talked. Pretty washerwoman you are. Never washed so much as a dishclout in all your life, I'll say. I'll lay. So she's caught him. But now I love this. He gets mad. Now he's really mad and he yells and insults her. Probably, I mean, I think I've noticed throughout this that he does not like to be laughed at. So
No.
that's what makes him
that is usually the last straw. And that's when he's gone about the country wearing this disguise, and yet he's told like everybody who he actually is.
Yeah. Because he couldn't possibly let them think that that's what he was.
Right.
Anyways, it's just hilarious. So yeah, he does not like to be laughed at. And then he thinks he's better than her, right? He said that in there somewhere. And when she sees that he's a toad, she says he's horrid and nasty. So she thinks she's better than him.
Yeah.
Very funny. So she grabs him by the leg and throws him off the barge. I can just picture that, right? Mm-hmm. And then so he like swims to the bank and he turns around and again she's laughing. And so he vows that like again she's laughing at him. That's the worst thing that could happen. So he vows to get revenge. So what does he do? He goes and he unties the horse from the barge and he takes off.
Because the horse was pulling the barge along,
the barge stops.
The barge runs aground. And that's a really kind of awful position that he left the barge woman in.
And it's funny because he's like, okay, so the horse wasn't in good shape. So at first it's running and then it's trotting and then it's walking, right? And so, but he turns around and he sees that the barge has like gone to the side, right? And he's like, well, I got away enough. This worked, right?
Yeah. I got my revenge. He was happy with that. So.
Yeah. And he like almost falls asleep on the horse. And then the horse like stops to bend down and eat some grass or something. And he almost falls off. Okay. So then he runs into a gypsy who's cooking a pot of something that smells wonderful. And he's so hungry. He remembers now, oh yeah, I haven't eaten today. I'm so hungry. So he can't decide if he should fight the gypsy or figure out something else to get some food. And so what does the gypsy do? Asks him, well, do you want to sell the horse?
Yeah. He's like, I'll buy the horse off of you. And that like turns on the light bulb in the toad's head.
He always goes too far.
Yeah. Always.
Yeah. So then he starts talking up the horse.
Yeah.
Like, oh, not this horse. It's my pride and joy,
Yeah.
Who's going to take my washing home to the customers every week? And I'm so fond of him. He simply dotes on me. And then, but then in the same breath, he says, but how much would you give me?
Yeah.
So he says 1 shilling per leg, which is 4 shillings. And he says it's worth more than that.
Not a whole lot though. because it's interesting later on in the book, he finds out that's actually how much it was worth. But it was funny though, because just the detail that the toad had to think for quite a while to figure out how much would it be if he got a shilling per leg.
Yes.
It was really funny. But yeah, and he was like insulted by that amount.
Yeah. It's not even his horse.
Yeah.
And then so then the gypsy offers him 5 shillings, and the toad is so hungry. He has no money. It doesn't seem to him like enough for a horse, but it's all profit because I stole the horse.
He stole the horse.
So
exactly.
So Toad asks him for 6 shillings and plus 6 pence, and then all the food he can eat that's in his pot. Plus, he'll throw in the harness and trappings of the horse. So they agree to it. The Toad eats and eats and eats until he can't eat anymore. And then the gypsy points him in the right direction for which way to go home. Again, he's walking and thinking about how great he is. Anytime he gets time alone, he starts
just thinking about how great he is, start singing a song, and which I really think that in our posts, I'm going to be putting like this poetry in these songs. They're so great.
It is funny. I like some of his thoughts are hilarious. I mean, he just like runs through everything he's done. There's surely no animal equal to me for cleverness in the whole world. My enemies shut me up in prison, encircled by sentries, watched night and day by wanderers. I walk out through them all by sheer ability coupled with courage. They pursue me with engines and policemen and revolvers. I snap my fingers at them and vanish, laughing into space. It's just hilarious that and then he composes a song with poetry. Yeah, we should put that in there.
Oh, I am the Toad, the handsome, the popular, the successful Toad. So funny.
Yes. The clever men at Oxford know all that there is to be knowed, but they none of them know one half as much as intelligent Mr. Toad. It's very funny. And then it says that the author only included the more mild verses because the other ones were too dreadfully conceited to be written down. Yeah. So, okay. So, of course, what do you think he sees when he's walking home? A car.
It's a car. Again.
And he's like, I'm going to ask for a ride. This is a great idea. And then he even says like, and I'm going to pull up to Toad Hall in a motor car.
Yeah.
This is like my triumphant return.
Yeah. And he's so excited because he's like, Badger's going to see me. And then that's just going to be great.
So the car starts getting closer and he realizes it's the same car that he had stolen from the Red Lion Hotel and has the same people in it. So the car, and he's like, oh no, what am I going to do now? And so he kind of like crumples into a ball on the side of the road because he's like, well, I'm going to have to go back to prison. This is the end. Then the car stops and 2 men get out. And of course, they think it's a washerwoman that has fainted in the road. So they kind of like scoop him up and put him in the car because they feel bad for him. Mm-hmm. And this is hilarious too. He's in there, they're driving. They're talking, and it says when Toad heard them talk in so kind and sympathetic a manner and knew that he was not recognized, his courage began to revive. I love this. And he cautiously opened first one eye and then the other. Like, I could totally see this, right?
I know.
Like,
such a character.
Yes. Like, I'm not sure. So I'm just going to open one eye and see, And then, of course, they're like, are you feeling better? And he's like, yeah, I'm feeling better, but I'd feel better if I was sitting in the front getting some fresh air in my face. So they let him sit in the front.
Yeah.
And then again, he's going too far. Could I drive the car? Anyways, he asks the driver if he can try driving. The driver laughs. And then the other guy says, well, it wouldn't hurt to let a washerwoman drive. So they put him in the driver's seat. And of course, he starts out slow. But do you think he can keep going slow? And they're kind of like, wow, you're a pretty good driver for this being your first time. Like, this seems a little interesting.
Well, and my favorite is that he tells himself that he's going to just take it slow and be careful. But he gets behind the wheel and he totally loses it.
Yes. And this is so interesting because this is a metaphor. It's drugs.
Totally.
So the car for Toad is a drug. And that's kind of how maybe drug addicts think is like, I can do it. I can just do
Yeah.
one or whatever, and I can
Yeah.
handle it. And then they get it. And then that's how I am with sugar. So I get it. So then he starts going faster and faster. And the men are warning him to be careful. They're like, be careful, washerwoman. And he gets annoyed because like he just is so immature, right?
Yeah.
And it says he began to lose his head. So the driver tries to stop him, but he pins the original driver is trying to stop him. So he pins him down with his elbow on the seat.
Which, like the picture of that in my head, it's just, I don't know why. It is just so funny to me.
This is a person. And we're talking about a toad driving.
Yeah.
A huge one, apparently. So yeah, he pins him down with an elbow and then goes full speed. And they're yelling at him again. Washerwoman, indeed. Ho ho. Okay. So then he says, it's Toad that's saying this. Washerwoman, indeed. Ho ho. I am the Toad, the motor car snatcher, the prison breaker, the Toad who always escapes. Sit still, and you shall know what driving really is. For you are in the hands of the famous, the skillful, the entirely fearless Toad. So then again, like you said, he admits that he is actually Toad. So they try to restrain him, but it said that they forgot to stop the car first.
Yeah.
So Toad crashes into a hedge and then the car lands in the pond. And he basically leaves the men in the pond running away as fast as he can. And the whole time, again, he's saying, look what I did. I outsmarted them again. I am the extraordinary Mr. Toad. Then he, goes back into his song. The motor car went poop, poop, poop as it raced along the road. Who was it steered it into a pond? Ingenious Mr. Toad. Okay. So then it's like with Toad, it's like up and down, up and down.
Oh my gosh, so much. In fact, in my book, I drew a little just because that's what he is. He's like very much.
He's like, I'm winning. I'm losing. I'm winning. So of course he's running away.
Do that again. Ho ho! I will do it again. Okay.
Within minutes.
Anyway. Yeah.
So he notices that he's running away. He notices that a driver and a policeman is following him, and it says that he's fat. The Toad is fat with short legs, and he cannot outrun them. So he runs straight into the river. Then he vows he's never going to steal a car again. And then he pulls himself to the riverbank, which he's having trouble because he's dressed in all this washerwoman clothing. And then Rat appears. Thank heavens for him. So Rat pulls Toad out of the river by the scruff. And he's like, if I could just get to Rat's house, then I'm not going to have to worry about being caught. So I can be safe in his house. So they go to Rat's house and Toad starts telling Rat all about his adventures. And Rat is like looking at him like the way he's dressed and saying, why don't you go clean up first and then we'll talk. Go change your clothes.
Yeah.
And he wants to argue, but then he sees himself in the mirror. He's like, yeah, that might be a good idea. So he goes upstairs or whatever. Yeah, I guess I just assumed it was upstairs. Goes to Rat's dressing room. That's what it is. And once he's changed into his clothes, he looks in the mirror again and he thinks, what idiot ever believed I was a washerwoman?
And that's what the readers are wondering this whole time too.
Yes. But like, yeah. And he's just like, I'm so great. How could anybody have believed I was a washerwoman? So they start eating, and as Toad is eating, he tells Rat about his adventures. And again, he's focusing on the fact that he's so clever and he outsmarted everybody. And so it's all bragging. And Rat asks him if he really thinks all of this is amusing. Now, Toady, I don't want to give you pain after all you've been through already, but seriously, don't you see what an awful ass you're making of yourself? And he says, it's all because you needed to steal a car. Like,
Yeah. And I kind of love his perspective here because where you have Toad going, look how clever and smart I am, and I dodged here, and I went there, and I stole this, and I traded that, and whatever. And Rat is like, let's see. From what you just told me, and there's probably more basically, but just from what you've told me, you've been handcuffed, imprisoned, starved, chased, terrified out of your life, insulted, jeered at, and ignominiously flung into the water by a woman, too. Like, what's the good part of this story? And you're proud of all of this?
Yeah.
You know? And so sometimes that's what our good friends are for, to help us to look at things with a new perspective.
Yeah, and then he says, be a cripple if you think it's exciting. Be a bankrupt for a change if you set your mind to it. But why choose to be a convict?
Yeah.
And then he's like, do you suppose it's any pleasure for me, for instance, to hear animals saying, I go about that I'm the chap that keeps company with jailbirds? He's like, think of me.
I
People
know.
are
Like,
saying I'm
yeah.
friends with a convict.
Yeah. If nothing else, like, think of your friends sometimes.
Yeah. So Toad says, you're right. I'm done with cars. But how about boats? When I was out on the water, I saw this other interesting thing, and how about boats? And then Rat makes a face, I think, and Toad says, "Well," or I think Rat says, "We can talk about this later." Like,
Yeah.
and so for now, all Toad wants is to have coffee with Rat, and then go home to live a quiet, respectable life. And he's talking about how like he's always going to have dinner for his friends, and they're always going to be welcome, and it's just going to be great, just like the good old days. And Rat says, you haven't heard that the Stoats and the Weasels have taken over Toad Hall?" Surprise. Everybody had been gossiping after he'd left. The wildwood animals said he wasn't coming back. Badger and Mole said he would come back, and they actually moved into Toad Hall to protect it. One night while they were in there, the Stoats and the Weasels were armed, and they came in and overtook Toad Hall. And Badger and Mole couldn't do anything about it. There was too many of them. They had weapons. So he went into this long story about that. Said that they made the best fight they could, but what was the good? They were unarmed and taken by surprise. And what can two animals do against hundreds? He says and I was worried about this. They took and beat them severely with sticks, those two poor faithful creatures, and turned them out into the cold and wet, after with many insulting and uncalled for remarks.
Yeah. And then Toad broke into he started laughing at that.
Yes. I wrote in my margins, gosh, he is awful.
He's like a total just like sociopath at this point. Good grief.
Yeah, because he starts laughing, and I am going like, Badger and Mole got beat. Like what?
Yeah.
And so he starts to laugh.
Trying to protect his house. That was the thing. And to back up just a little bit, the thing is like Rat tells him that like Badger and Mole were trying to defend Toad constantly from all the gossip and everything.
Yes.
And they're like, he's gonna come back somehow, and the Weasels and so it's like, there's no way. And Rat was like, they argued from history. They said that no criminal laws had ever been known to prevail against cheek and plausibility such as yours, combined with the powerful power of a long purse. And so they're like, he's not going to get out because he's innocent or anything, but like for some reason he just gets away with everything, so he's gonna be back.
Yeah.
That was their entire argument. But so like don't try to settle here because he's definitely gonna be back. Somehow he figures it out.
That's true, and he does. And so the wild wooders, so that the Stoats and the Weasels, and there was another kind of animal in there, but they'd been living there ever since. So he said, just doing awful things, lying in bed half the day, breakfast at all hours. The place is a mess, I'm told, because they can't go in there. They're eating his food and his drinks and making bad jokes about it, singing vulgar songs. about prisons and magistrates and policemen. And you do hear later, they are making fun of him the whole time. They're like in his house and they're mocking him. And anyways, so Toad says, I am going to go get rid of him. I'm going to go take care of this. And Rat's like, I don't think that's a good idea. He says, you're just going to get yourself into trouble. They can't stop him. Comes across a ferret.
Not yet. He just kind of like marches right up to the gate, and there's a ferret with a gun guarding the gate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He starts talking to him and the ferret just shoots at him.
Yeah. But I love it. Like, he prudently dropped flat in the road and the bullet whistled over his head. So it missed him.
Yes. But. Yeah. So luckily and then again, he's like, look what I did. So he goes back to Rat's house and Rat says, it's no use. Like, what did I tell you? It's no good. They have sentries posted. They're all armed. We're just gonna have to figure something out. So then he takes Rat's boat upriver. And from far away, everything looks peaceful and fine. But then as he's about to pass under a bridge, a big boulder comes down into the boat and sinks it. And he looks up and he saw two stoats leaning over the bridge and watching him, and they were with glee. It says they were amused. So, and then they said, it will be your head next time, Toady. Poor Toad. So again, he goes back to Rat's house and Rat again says, well, what did I tell you? And now look what you've done. You lost my favorite boat. You ruined my nice suit. And it's really a wonder you have friends at all. So Toad apologizes again. And then Rat tells him to sit down for dinner. And then Toad finally asks about Badger and Mole. Like, out of duty.
He even says that he'd forgotten all about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, how nice of you. Okay.
Yeah.
So then Rat is kind of like, finally, like, I've been waiting for you to ask about them. So while Toad was out gallivanting, Badger and Mole had been camping and keeping. So like, even after they were beaten and thrown out, they were still watching his house to make sure. They were trying to figure out how to get back in. And Toad is sorry briefly until dinner comes. And Rat says, I'm just going to give him a pass because he's been in prison. He's been eating prison food. He's probably really hungry. After they finish dinner, Badger knocks at the door and he looks haggard. He looks like he'd been through it, right? He sits down at dinner. He sits down and serves himself a piece of cold pie, and he's kind of short with them. And Rat says, that's just because Badger is so hungry, and that's how he is when he's hungry. Because Toad's kind of questions it, like, is he mad? You know what? Why is he acting like this? Is he mad at me?
Yeah.
No, he's just hungry. So then Mole comes to the door, and he is also very shabby, unwashed. He has bits of hay and straw sticking in his fur. And he comes in and he's like, hooray, it's Toad. He's here. Fancy having you back. And then he says they never thought he'd come back so soon. I love that Mole is like almost fooled by Toad, where the other two kind of aren't. And he's like, why? You must have managed to escape, you clever, ingenious, intelligent Toad. The others don't call him that.
No. Yeah. He doesn't know enough yet, but I feel like by the end of the book, he will. So,
yeah. So what's funny too is as he's complimenting Toad, Rat is trying to stop him, but it's too late.
Too late. Toad is puffing and swelling already.
Yes. Puffing and swelling. Mole wants to hear all about Toad's stories as he's eating. And Rat says, be quiet. We don't want to hear the stories. But then he asks Mole for an update. And he says that there's sentries posted everywhere, the guns poked out at us, stones thrown at us, always an animal on the lookout. And when they see us, my, how do they laugh? That's what annoys me most. Again, the laughter.
Yeah.
And so basically little has changed. And so Rat kind of gets some, like, he's thinking out loud and he's like, what should Toad do? And then Mole interrupts him and says, I think I know what Toad should do. And then Toad says, nobody's going to tell me what to do.
Yeah.
They're trying to help him, and he's
Yeah.
not teachable, not helpable. I don't know.
Yeah, not at all.
So then Badger just tells him to be quiet. So Badger tells him, your father would be ashamed of you. And then Toad starts to sob. And Badger says, okay, but the past is in the past. And we can't attack them because there's too many of them. So we need another way. And then he tells of a secret passageway that Toad's father had told him about, but also said, don't tell Toad because he can't keep a secret. Unless it's an emergency, then you can tell him about it. So it's this passageway that goes under the house up to the butler's pantry, and the butler's pantry is right next to the dining hall. He's a bit of a talker, and he says, I have the gift of conversation. And then he says, I've been told I ought to have a salon, whatever that may be. I just thought that was kind of a funny little
That
joke.
is really funny. And I have to put something in here really quickly. So, because he says that, I've been told I'm a bit of a talker. So, in one of our wards, so when we first moved to Oregon, we lived in Gresham, and our ward there, it was such a great ward. And Ken was in the bishopric. We had this couple that was from the UK, and they were just the best. They very much had that sort of old school, like, children just need to sit still, be still, like seen and not heard type of thing. And so there were some kids in the congregation that would really drive them crazy sometimes. And so this lady, I think he was from Ireland and she was from Scotland. But anyway, so she wrote a note to Ken and she was like, Brother Hulse, you are a man of not a few words. Would you please talk to these people and tell them to get their kids under control? Basically, it was so funny. It was really funny. But I know. Yeah, he was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But thanks for saying that I talk a lot.
You're a man, not a few words.
You're a man of not a few words.
And then that's funny because my husband is a man of few words. We're married to opposites. Yeah, when we were gonna get married, when people found out we were gonna get married, they were like, does he talk to you? Like, yeah, he does.
Yes.
Sometimes a lot. I just love that. He has a way of like turning it around. I have the gift of conversation. Otter had disguised himself as a sweep. Mm-hmm. And went up to the back door basically. And he learned that Chief Weasel's birthday is tomorrow night. So everybody's going to be in the banquet hall, and they're going to be unarmed. There will be sentinels outside, but the passageway leads under the house and into the dining hall, so they can just pass right by them. I like this too. Like, they're talking about it, right? And they're kind of all sensible. And then when Toad comes in, so like the mole says, we shall creep out quietly into the butler's pantry with our pistols and swords and sticks, shouted the rat, and rush in upon them, said Badger. And the Toad says, and whack 'em and whack 'em and whack 'em, cried the Toad in ecstasy, running round and round the room and jumping over the chairs. He goes nuts. It's like a kid.
Totally like a kid. That's the thing. And that's why I think that sort of perspective of him being compared to Kenneth Grahame's son. And I don't think any of the negative things or like the drug addiction issues or anything like that, but just like the funny things like that, like whack him and whack him and whack him, and then just like running and jumping around the room and over chairs and stuff.
Yes. So Badger sends everybody to bed. And then in the morning, of course, Toad wakes up late, because he always does. And Mole is out, Badger is reading the newspaper, and Rat is distributing the weapons. Toad says I'll learn him to steal my house. I'll learn him. And Rat's like, learn him isn't really good English. And Rat says, I think you should say teach him, not learn him. And then Badger says, we don't want to teach him. We want to learn him. Well, learn them. And what's more, we're going to do it too. Mole comes in. He'd been up like bothering the sentries, I think, the stoats that are up guarding the house. And he had dressed in the washerwoman's clothes and went up there. And he told them that people were going to come tonight and like attack them from outside.
Yeah.
And
like hundreds and hundreds of animals, well armed and well prepared.
Yes. And the Toad is like, at first, he's kind of like, I hope you didn't do that. Like, that was dumb. And Badger's like, no, it was a great idea. And then Toad's like, I wish I would have thought of it.
Yeah. Yep.
And he's jealous because Badger says, great job all the time. Badger's telling Mole he's doing a great job. So then everybody eats lunch. And then Badger goes and takes a nap. And Rat goes back to preparing their weapons. And then Mole takes Toad outside because he wants to hear the rest of his adventures.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says, with nobody to check his statements or criticize, he kind of goes crazy with his stories. Yes.
Yeah, it says much that he related belonged more properly to the category of what might have happened had I only thought of it in time instead of 10 minutes afterwards.
Yes.
So they were much heavily embellished stories.
Yes. And that's the end of chapter 11.
Let's just jump right into chapter 12. It's called The Return of Ulysses, which I believe is an allusion to the Iliad, right? Anyways, because Toad is coming back to his hall, but he's got Rat and Badger and Mole and they've got a plan. They're going to go attack the ferrets and the weasels and the stoats and get them out of there. And of course, Mole kind of set things up. He sort of embedded some chaos in there to make it a little bit easier for them to accomplish their mission. So they set out, and Badger's in the lead, and he's like, Toad, you're at the back of this line. You know, Toad thinks he's going to take the front, and Badger's like, no. You know, anything that you take control of ends up in total just disarray. So no, if this is going to work, you need to just listen to everything we say and stay the back of the line. In fact, they're like starting to go through the tunnel. They're totally like armed to the hilt with all these things that Rat has put together with them. I kind of underlined everything. They've got a sword and a cutlass, a pair of pistols, policeman's truncheons, several sets of handcuffs, bandages, sticking plaster, flask, and sandwich case. Not sure what the sandwich case is for, but like, okay. So they're armed to the hilt.
What's funny too is Badger thinks it's funny. He's like, I just need a stick.
Yeah, he's like, okay, I'll carry all this, but I'm really gonna use a stick.
Yeah, and he's like, and then is it Rat that says, well, I just didn't want to be accused of like not having what we needed.
Of forgetting anything, exactly. Yeah, so they're going through the tunnel, and Toad, he like creates this domino effect. He like runs into Mole, and who runs into Rat, who runs into Badger, and Badger's thinking they're being attacked from behind, and he realizes it's Toad just being a dork. And so he's like super angry, and he's like, if you make a fool of yourself one more time, you're just going to be left behind. We're not going to put up with any of this. Just make their way through the tunnel, and they're just going along, and they get to where they can hear the noise up above. They can hear the weasels. They can hear the stoats, the ferrets, who are making, quite a racket, and they're in the banqueting hall. What they realize is that there's like somebody in particular that everybody's celebrating, one of the weasels, and they hear them making fun of Toad, right? And of course, Toad hears this, and here's some of the things they say. This weasel who everybody sort of seems to be celebrating, he's like, I should like to say one word about our kind host, Mr. Toad. We all know Toad. Everybody's laughing. Everybody's cheering. Good Toad, modest Toad, honest Toad. Everybody is just laughing. Of course, they're being very sarcastic and just really mocking Toad. And So of course Toad is just like really angry. He's like, let me at him, let me at him. And Badger's like, hold back, hold back. And then they start singing a song mocking Toad. Toad, he went to pleasuring gaily down the street. Anyway, they use that to give them the momentum they need to just like, that's sort of their motivational speech to get them out there and get them doing what they need to do. They fling the door open wide, and as soon as they do, there's a squeaking and screeching, and the weasels are terrified. They start diving under tables and going out the windows and going up the chimney. The ferrets jam up the chimney. And it says, well might tables and chairs be upset and glass and china be sent crashing on the floor in the panic of that terrible moment when the four heroes strode wrathfully into the room. The mighty Badger, Mole is black and grim, Rat was desperate and determined, and Toad is frenzied with excitement, and he has injured pride. So the thing is, like, with all the buildup, so much buildup to this, it all is over pretty quickly. There's a little bit of fighting, but they basically get everybody on the floor. They get them in their handcuffs. They threaten them and all these things. But they're out, like, all the weasels and stoats and ferrets are out of there pretty quickly. And Badger, he immediately like gives a lot of credit to Mole, because basically what happens is, as the weasels and the ferrets start heading outside, the stoats are remembering what Mole had said. And so they think that there's all this attack happening from the inside. So it seems like they start attacking each other, the stoats and the weasels and the ferrets. They start attacking each other because the stoats are on the outside, like guarding, but then this massive of animal just starts coming outside. And so they just start fighting each other. And so it like works out that Mole and Rat and Badger and Toad, they don't even have to do very much fighting. They just start a little chaos on the inside. Everybody runs outside, and then they take care of it for them, basically. And so Badger gives Mole a ton of credit, and Toad is very upset that he doesn't get any credit. Not sure why he would, but that's just how he is, because he had apparently taken down he had taken down the chief weasel. So he'd taken down one guy, and so he felt like he should get a lot more credit. Is there something you wanted to say?
No, just because he was making fun. The chief weasel is the one they're celebrating, and he's the one that was making fun of Toad. And so Toad was like, I'm on him. I like how he says, Toad, he went a pleasuring. He yelled, I'll pleasure him. And he went straight for the chief weasel. It's just, anyways.
Yes. Yeah.
So
very good.
He did take down one, but Mole is responsible for multiples.
Yeah. And basically their victory. So
yeah. And they have like 12, they have like a dozen still captive. They handcuffed them and put them in a circle, like in the middle of the dining hall. So they've got at least some left,
yes.
But most of them scattered quickly.
Right. And in fact, so Badger tells Mole, okay, like, you're amazing, you deserve to take a break, but what I want you to do is to take these captured weasels, push them upstairs to get things cleaned up and orderly, and make sure that beds have clean sheets and all the rooms are neat as a pin and everything is tidy, cleaned out, sweep under the beds, all these things. Make sure there's hot water, clean towels, fresh cakes of soap put in each room, and then, basically send them on their way. And so Mole does it. It actually goes pretty well, because the weasels themselves are like, they actually seem to like Mole.
They're pretty repentant. Yes,
very repentant. It's like they're very much followers, and they were there because they were following the chief weasel, and now they're like, okay, this is our penance. We should do this. And
I love it too how they say, like, we'll come back and help anything you need. Like,
yeah,
they feel really bad.
Yeah, let us know. Exactly. Toad is able to put all this jealousy from him and say, thank you so much to Mole. And that made Badger happy. He was like, there spoke my brave Toad. It says that Toad's ancestral home has now been won back by matchless valor, consummate strategy, and a proper handling of sticks. Love that. There they are. They all sleep that night in Toad Hall. And the next morning, Toad, he overslept and like all the breakfast is gone. And he comes down and he sees that Mole and Rat, they're just out on the lawn. They're telling each other stories. They're roaring with laughter. And Badger's there in an armchair reading the paper. And
I just like there that he's like, he vows to get revenge for them eating without him. Like they've done so much for him, right? And
yes,
like he's the one that overslept, and it's just like he can't see anything past himself.
no,
Yeah.
never.
Funny.
And it doesn't matter how extreme he's had very extreme circumstances, but nothing will change him. Nothing will really get through to him, because you're right. Like he's bitter about them eating breakfast without him, even though he's the one who overslept. They're the one who saved his whole house, and he's bitter about it. But so Badger is there and he's like, you better not settle down too much today because you've got a lot of work to do. Toad's like, okay, for what? Well, Badger's expecting that Toad is going to put on a banquet for everybody to be like, look, I have my house back. I'm back in the neighborhood and I'm going to celebrate because of this victory. And Badger's like, this has to happen, basically. Toad was like, all right, I do not live to please myself, but merely to find out what my friends want and then try and arrange it for them, you dear old Badger. And Badger was like, don't pretend to be stupider than you really are. And don't chuckle and splutter in your coffee while you're talking. Because Toad was like, oh, okay, yeah, we're going to have it like right now. He's being very sarcastic. And Badger was like, no, of course it's going to be tonight. But you have a lot of work to do in order to make it happen tonight. And you need to he's like, I will totally help with all the arrangements, but you need to get out these invitations now.
He doesn't want to write the invitations out. He just wants to go have fun. He he thinks I need to go through my house and set everything right and make sure everything's okay. Like that's the last thing I want to do is sit down and write out invitations.
Right. But it's so funny. And this is another place that I just drew a little up and down line, because he's like, I don't want to do that. That's horrible. What a horrible way to spend the morning. And then all of a sudden he's like, of course. What is my pleasure or convenience compared with that of others? You wish it done and it shall be done. Because he has decided that if he gets to write the invitations, he also gets to write out the program for the evening featuring himself. Yes. So, and in the invitations, he also writes down all of the amazing things that he did to win the house back. So he sees writing the invitations where it was such this horrible idea before. Now he sees it as an opportunity to fluff himself up for everybody. So he does that, and he sketches out this program for the evening, which features speeches and addresses, synopses, and songs and other compositions, all by him. He gets one of the weasels, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. Who is very ready to help with anything. He gets the weasel and he's like, here's all these invitations. I need them delivered. And so the weasel is like, oh yeah, I'll do that. And he's pretty happy with himself. Well, Mole comes in and talks to him and he immediately suspects something is up. Because like we've talked about before, Mole, he's gradually getting to where he's like, Toad is not so great as I originally thought, right?
I have a funny story about that. So I wrote down Toad is upbeat and a little suspicious. And the other day, Presley was telling me a story. And I don't know if your kids say the word sus for suspicious.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
And one time I used it and they were like, never say that again, Mom. I was like, okay.
Yeah, there's words we're not allowed to use.
Yeah.
I've been told that. But Presley, she's 5. She's telling me this story the other day about this girlfriend who turned her boyfriend into a pizza or something. And she was telling me about this girlfriend and she's like, yeah, she was a little sus. It's like, you're 5. And she just said it like it was this natural part of her speech,
Yeah.
She was sus.
That is so funny. I love it.
Yes. So yeah, I was gonna say Toad's a little sus.
Yes, I would say that Mole was thinking that exact same thing.
So Mole's catching on. He's like,
Yes.
And, a few chapters ago, or just a couple, he was like, tell me more stories, tell me more stories. And now he's like, I think I'm
Yeah.
getting it.
Yeah. And Rat, we find out that Rat knows. So he says, look here, Toad. It's about this banquet. And I'm sorry to have to speak to you like this, but we want you to understand clearly once and for all that there are going to be no speeches and no songs. Like, he knows him, right? He says, try and grasp the fact that on this occasion, we're not arguing with you, we're telling you. Like, this is not a debate, it's not a discussion. This is how it's going to be. Basically, at this point, they are in that position where they do have every right to be like, no, this is what's happening. They have saved his life. They've saved his home. They've done everything. And it's not a matter of like, okay, he owes them his life or something, but they do have a degree of authority to be like, no, this is not happening. And Toad's like, well, can't I sing them just one little song? And Rat's like, no, all of your songs are full of bragging and conceit and vanity, and your speeches are all self-praise and gross exaggeration. And Badger's like, and gas. It's just hot air, dude. It's all lies, you know? And Rat's like, look, for your own sake, you have to turn over a new leaf. Like, this has to be the catalyst for your change, or nothing is ever going to be good in your life. And Toad is finally like, okay, well, you shall never have occasion to blush for me again. Badger's like, Rat and Badger are kind of both feeling bad about how they've treated Toad, but Badger's like, look, he has to be somebody who's able to live on his own and be respectable. He, at this point, cannot actually take care of himself. He can like go along and be so proud of how he gets out of jail and he gets out of these scrapes. But why does he keep being in all these scrapes? He's very disrespected. Look at what the Weasels and the Stoats are saying about him. And the fact that they just came in and took over his house as soon as he was gone. He's not respected at all, right? Oh, and then we find out that Rat had suspected that there might be something amiss with the invitations. So he had grabbed one from the Weasel, read the first one. He was like, nope. So he threw all of them out. So none of those invitations from Toad were delivered. And Rat actually sat down and wrote all of them out and did that. So, but I love the next part. It's really funny because Toad, he's not happy that he doesn't get to perform.
Yeah.
So he's still going to perform.
For himself.
Yeah,
for imaginary audience.
Yes. So he goes into his room and he locks the door and he sets up all these chairs and he proceeds to perform. He has this hilarious little song. It's Toad's last little song. And he sings it really loud with great unction and expression to all these empty chairs, but it gives him satisfaction. It's not even so much about the audience. It's just about the act of giving himself some praise. That's what gives him his dopamine hits.
Yes.
So, and then right after that, it says he smooths down his hair and he realizes that all of his guests are going to be there. And so he goes down into the main hall and he's very subdued. He's very subdued to the point that some people are like, oh, this isn't like a normal fun Toad party. Because he's like,
what's going on?
Something is wrong.
They
And
even say it's not as fun. Like,
yeah.
It's just not as fun as it usually is. What's going on? Which I wouldn't think him bragging would be fun, but maybe they think he's funny. So
I think that is the main thing. He's just usually very lively and funny. And even if he's this very braggadocio, he is entertaining to be around. And he's like the polar opposite of that because he apparently cannot find a middle ground. But he does like go around and he gives credit to the others. He's like, Badgers was the mastermind. Mole and Water Rat bore the brunt of the fighting. But he did feel like as he moved around so subdued and giving credit to these other people, he felt like he was an absorbing interest to everyone. So he still felt like he had everybody's attention, just in a more subdued way. He's so funny.
Did they even
And
like pound on the table and are like, Toad speech from Toad, song, Mr. Toad song? And he just is like, no,
yeah,
I'm not doing it.
he basically ignored it. And everybody's like, well, he is a very much altered Toad. So, and one of the things too is every time he looked at Rat and Mole, their mouths were just like wide open, like, what is even happening? Like, he is completely different. So after the banquet, and this is a while down the road, it just talks about how they're able to convince him to basically give compensation to all the people that he'd like taken advantage of or had helped him along his way. So he sent a gold chain and locket set with pearls to the jailer's daughter who had helped him escape. The engine driver in his turn was properly thanked and compensated. Even the barge woman, they sought her out and made good to her. And one of the things they did to make good to her was to pay her back for the horse. And this is the funny part where they found out that the gypsy's estimation of the horse's value was actually quite accurate, a shilling per leg.
Yeah, but he was like okay with sending stuff to the jailer's daughter and the engine driver, but like he kind of fought back on the barge woman.
Yeah. Yeah, he really didn't like her because she found him out and was mocking him and called him an ugly toad. He still kind of gets what he wants in a way, because it talks about how he would sometimes walk through the wildwood in the evenings and a mother weasel might be out with her little ones and she'd be like, look, there goes the great Mr. Toad. And there's the gallant water rat. And here comes the famous Mr. Mole. And so there's sort of these just little heroes walking along. And of course, Mr. Badger gets the same thing. But what I love is the very last part. When they're infants, so like the mother weasels, when their infants were fractious and quite beyond control, they would quiet them by telling them how if they didn't hush up and not fret, the terrible gray badger would up and get them. So Badger kind of became the boogeyman.
Yeah.
And it says this was a base libel on Badger, who, though he cared little about society, we know he doesn't like people in general, but he does love children. But despite that, threatening the little weasel children that Mr. Badger would come get them, it would have its full effect and they would behave themselves. So he kind of became the terror, which is not really fair to him, but
yeah,
he's quite the warrior. So anyway, and that brings us to the very end of the story.
Yay. I know it's like at the very end, Toad does change just a little. So, I mean, even though it's like short stories, it kind of had like a theme throughout and we kind of get an ending and very nice. I loved it.
Yeah. And we definitely we get this evolution of Mole.
Yes.
And just at the very end, a little, we start to see some maturing in Toad, perhaps, hopefully. I think that's left for us to sort of infer.
Yeah.
Going to change? I don't know. Maybe.
A little better.
Fun story. But it was really interesting to me to read about Kenneth Grahame and sort of his reason for the story and the themes behind it. And I think that, we're breaking it down into so that you can actually understand the story, but there's so much more behind it. It's amazing, because what some scholars have said is that he is an heir of both Wordsworth and Dickens, and all of them are they're trying to make a representation of childhood a core in their work and to make children these intelligible humans. Where before, so pre-Victorian era, children were just seen as mini adults. They're not children, they're just mini adults. And they're treated very harshly. And instead of children's stories, adults would tell them only stories that were sometimes threatening and harsh. And if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. And of course they would tell them Bible stories, but it was always about a moral because which is not bad, but just very heavy and harsh, and of course children were not always treated the best. And even in the Victorian era, they weren't necessarily, but it sort of became this transition point, I think. And maybe it began with storytellers like Kenneth Grahame and Charles Dickens, and even like J.M. Barrie and Lewis Carroll, and those who were like writing stories that were very like, here's some stories for children to actually love that do teach morals, but they're like beautiful and enriching. And for Kenneth Grahame, it talks about how he gives a gentle recollection of what it means to be a child. And he shows how nature is sort of an escape for them from the harsh realities of life. And nature is where they find meaning, and which we totally find in The Wind and the Willows. And also his theme is sort of like that children are the last bastions of innocence and purity, and let's let them maintain that. And we find that in the Victorian era, that's when like they would build these nurseries for the children and provide lots of toys for them, because it was like, you know what, adulthood kind of sucks. Let's let you be children as long as possible. So that really was a turning point in the family structure, and allowing children to be children instead of just mini adults. If that
I'd
makes
never thought of that before. So they must have not like provided those opportunities and like written stories for them and just expected them to come responsible.
Yeah.
And that's interesting.
Yeah. And I think that's why you hear about like children being beaten, and like I say, that still did happen during the Victorian era and up until, well, sometimes even today, but not nearly as much. It's not acceptable today where it was at that point. So it's really interesting. First of all, so he was born in the Highlands of Scotland, and his father, his name was James Grahame. He was, by all accounts, quite wealthy. Apparently, they descended from Robert the Bruce. If anybody's ever watched Braveheart, you know who Robert the Bruce is. But there's also like, anyway, he was Robert the Bruce of the King of Scotland in the 14th century or the 1400s. I can't remember right now. But anyways, but they had no nobility or royalty. Like, he wasn't any of that, but he was a socialite and quite well-to-do. But it seems that he probably did suffer from some depression and things like that. He fell in love with a beautiful woman named Bessie Ingalls. They got married and had 3 children, one right after the other. Kenneth was the third of their children. He was born in 1859 in Edinburgh. And then in 1860, it was kind of random, but his father moved them to, I'm probably going to say it wrong, but it's Inverary. I've heard of like Inverness, and this is Inverary, Scotland. And then when Kenneth was about 5 years old, his mother gave birth to her 4th child, and she contracted scarlet fever and died. And Kenneth actually also contracted scarlet fever. So he's just this little 5-year-old. He's lost his mother and he's deathly ill. And I'm sure that the distress of losing his mother like makes it worse. But one of his grandmas comes and cares for him and nurses him back to health. But for the rest of his life, a scarlet fever is prone to do, it like leaves his lungs very weak. And it seems like scarlet fever will affect many different things. It just depends on what the lasting effect of is. But for him, it was his lungs. And after the loss of his wife, Kenneth's dad was like so distraught that he basically contacted his mother-in-law, Grandma Ingalls, and was like, I need you to take the children. And so she came and she took all 4 children back to her home, which was, it was called the Mount. It was in Cookham Dean in England. And it's funny, like all these places, I felt like I was fairly familiar with a lot of the places in England, but I've never heard of Cookham Dean. I don't know. But the River Thames runs through it. So Grandma Ingalls, she provided for all their needs. They had a beautiful place to live. And he Kenneth Grahame loved his childhood with the resiliency of youth that, he was able to use nature again as an escape. And we'll talk about that more in just a minute. But his grandmother, by all accounts, was quite harsh, as, again, people tended to be in that period of time. But she did provide for their needs. And she felt like she was doing her duty as a grandmother. But his father, like, she was not well off. She was able to provide for their needs, but she was not well off. And his father, who by all accounts was quite well off, he never provided any money for the raising of his children. Yeah. And so that's pretty pathetic. And it speaks a lot to the kind of person he was, I think. Like, sure, you're grieving the loss of your wife, but you have 4 children. And even if you feel like maybe their grandmother is the best option for them, like, at least provide for them, go see them. But he never did any of that. But the fortunate thing for Kenneth and his siblings was that they had an amazing uncle. And I feel like this is a really touching part of the story. They had an amazing uncle who was there for the first couple of years. His name was Uncle David. And then he was married and he moved away, but he was in the children's life. And he was very influential. He loved boating. He loved the river. He loved nature. And he would take the children on all these things. And that is who Rat is based on. That is his character. He bases Rat on his Uncle David because he loved his Uncle David so much. And he was so influential and good. And I love that because Rat is like such a hero in the story. And he's so steady and wonderful. And so I thought that was really great.
Maybe Badger was his father.
Maybe
kind of
so.
like mean. I don't know, but he was also good.
Or maybe he was even like his grandmother.
Yeah.
Like there was love there, but also a lot of harshness.
Yeah.
He and his siblings, they were like just everything you dream about your childhood being, other than like his mother dying and his father being absent and all that. They were able to just like roam free in nature. The position of her home was like right there amongst the woods and the river, and the adults in their life were kind of absent. And so that's not really great other than Uncle David, but they just roamed free and they just loved nature. And so the idea of using nature as an escape from reality, that was his life. And he says that he looked back on his childhood as a happy time. And I think it was because they were able to roam free in nature and partake so much of that joy and beauty and appreciate that. And it's amazing because you think about it, like in that same circumstance, other kids, other people could probably respond completely differently.
Yeah.
Where a father is absent, a mother is gone, there's the absence of really much adult influence except for one, but they do have a grandma who provides for their needs. Others might take that and totally go off the deep end and do crazy things. But where they are spending so much time loving and appreciating nature, I think it helped all of them to develop and become good people. So he did really well in school, Kenneth Grahame did, and he was bound for Oxford, which is, very prestigious and really great. But they did not have the money. And that's where it's a little frustrating because it's like he really should have been able to go there if his father had cared at all. But they didn't have the money for him to go. And so instead he applied at, I want to say, the Bank of England. It was at a bank. And he kind of rose through the ranks because he was really intelligent and he did really well. There was like sort of a confrontation with one of the other workers there. So it was the Bank of England. He was a clerk and then he became a secretary. He did have poor health, but apparently there was a bank robbery. From what I've read, there's like different accounts. Some people say he was shot in the bank robbery, and others say it was just very distressed by the bank robbery. He was not actually injured. But one way or the other, it kind of led to his retirement from the bank. And he was married. He got married quite a bit later in life, and he had his son, Alistair. And he did tell these stories to his child, Alistair, as, again, a way of trying to preserve his youth. Like, so he would tell him all these bedtime stories and he turned them into The Wind in the Willows. But I guess he was actually, the thing that actually brought him to literary fame even earlier was this book called The Golden Age, published in 1898, and then its sequel, which was called Dream Days. And these are all about childhood, and they're a reflection of his childhood. So he was like, that like took him to literary fame, but those are totally out of print. Most people have not read them. But it was The Wind in the Willows that really like propelled him forward, and everybody loved it. And of course, we still love it today. It's like this cornerstone of childhood. And it really, like I said, apparently he's considered an heir of Dickens and Wordsworth because of that. And then there's people like A.A. Milne who were totally inspired by it. Like that inspired him for Winnie the Pooh. And apparently A.A. Milne actually was one of the first people to dramatize The Wind in the Willows. He like wrote a play from it. But there's this really amazing quote from A.A. Milne. He says, "One does not argue about The Wind in the Willows. The young man gives it to the girl with whom he is in love, and if she does not like it, asks her to return his letters." Basically, break off the relationship if you don't like The Wind in the Willows. The older man tries it on his nephew and alters his will accordingly. The book is a test of character. We can't criticize it because it is criticizing us. As I wrote once, it is a household book. A book which everybody in the household loves and quotes continually. A book which is read aloud to every new guest and is regarded as the touchstone of his worth. But I must give you one word of warning. When you sit down to it, don't be so ridiculous as to suppose that you are sitting in judgment on my taste or on the art of Kenneth Grahame. You are merely sitting in judgment on yourself. You may be worthy, I don't know, but it is you who are on trial. I was like, dang. All right. There it is.
That's funny.
Yeah, I thought so. So there's A.A. Milne's take on it. It's like, this is the sort of pinnacle of judgment. And it's judging you. You are not judging it.
Yeah. I mean, and it is, if you look in there, you'll find yourself somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. It sketches like humanity.
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to go into the books that we've thought of?
Yeah. Yeah. What were some that you thought of?
So, well, you mentioned Winnie the Pooh. So I looked up a list of anthropomorphic, that's not how you said that, literature, right? And what came up was the Jungle Book. Like there was 3 books by, is it Rudyard Kipling?
Rudyard, yeah.
The Jungle Book, Just So Stories, and then I've never heard of this one, Puck of Pook's Hill. That was interesting. That is a fantasy book that's 6 short stories set in different periods of English history. And there's a poem with each story. So I thought that was interesting because we had a lot of poetry in this book. The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams Blanco. And then you've mentioned before in one of the episodes, Watership Down by Richard Adams. And then the Chronicles of Narnia also has animals that speak.
Yeah, that's true. And that would be a good one too. And
then I went to the library, and the great thing about the library is everything is available for a book like this, just because it's not Diary of a Wimpy Kid or whatever,
right? It should be, especially according to A.A. Milne, but
and I don't know if you feel like this, but like I felt like I can't read this book to my 5-year-old. Like it's way too advanced.
Not to your 5-year-old, but I was like, I do need to read it to my kids because I don't have a 5-year-old. And of course, Cass wouldn't get it, but the others would.
So you think even your youngest would?
I think so. Yeah.
But another thing is,
she's almost 8, but yeah.
Yeah. There were several versions of movies that I was able to check out at the library, like a Disney short films, animation. There's the Wind in the Willows. It's like this one, it says the complete first series. So, and then there was another DVD that I didn't check out that was the second series. Anyways, so like this would be a good way to get these stories into your kids' young kids' heads.
That's really true.
Where you couldn't necessarily sit down. Although Presley did say a couple weeks after I read her the first chapter, and then I was like, okay, this isn't gonna work. But later she asked me, like, well, what happened to that story with the toad and the frog, the
Really?
toad and the rat? And I was
Interesting.
like, "Hmm." And then this is what I think is most exciting. I found these early readers by, they say Kenneth Grahame on them, but okay, adapted by Laura Driscoll.
Mm.
And these early readers, like, you know, that a child could read to themselves.
I love it.
Anyways, and
I
so
think
there's
that's
like
so cool.
the first book is called The Riverbank, which is obviously the first story. And the
Mhm.
second one is The Open Road, which is obviously the second one. And then I checked out the first three, The Wildwood. And I noticed there was 6 of them. So anyways, that's another way. And then the last thing is, here we go. I found this picture book. It says it's called the Riverbank and Other Stories from the Wind and the Willows. And it says it's by Kenneth Grahame. So I'm guessing it has to be like kind of abridged, is what I'm guessing. But it's like illustrated.
Yes.
So that's another idea. And I don't know if your kids, do they like books like that where they're illustrated?
Oh
Or they're
yeah,
okay with you just
definitely.
sitting? Okay.
No, they love the illustrated. It brings it so much more to life. So yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, that's what I would do with my little kids if I
Yeah.
wanted to read them this, is find a good version that is goes down a little easier.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. I think that's a really good idea because just the introducing it to them and then eventually they can read the real story because I think that that's really important, but just getting the idea in there. As far as other books, I think, yeah, like you, I don't know if there's many others that can do what The Wind in the Willows does besides Winnie the Pooh and A House on Pooh Corner and When We Were Very Young. I don't know if you've read any of those poems by A. Milne, but they're just, oh, so good. Because he really, you can see, especially after reading this, you can see he's very inspired by this idea of letting children be children, preserving their innocence. And that is, but at the same time, teaching them what it means to be a good human. And so, and I think you learn so much from the Winnie the Pooh stories. Those are really wonderful. And from his poetry. So, and then the other one that we've talked about before too is just all of the Beatrix Potter books. And they're short stories, but they're very sweet and beautiful and good. And you've got these cute animals, sometimes doing really funny antics, but she brings them to life and they're just really
When I was a little kid, our library had these tiny little versions of them.
Mhm.
Do you remember that? And I used to check those out all the time as a kid because
Yeah.
I thought they were
Yeah.
so cute.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead
I
on
think
that.
they have them at the Eugene Library
Yep.
as well.
Well, they
Because
had them 40 years ago.
well, yeah, well, the same, yeah, same library, but like more recently, just because like my girls would gravitate towards those because they're so tiny and so cute. So they
And
love
then
those.
I like at one point when our older kids were little, I started collecting them from St. Vincent's. But
Oh, fun.
I probably got rid of them in one of
Okay.
my like decluttering moments, which I now wish I wouldn't have. But
Yeah, that is the one thing that I'm like, books, you're gonna regret getting rid of books unless they're just like super stupid books.
my
But like,
theory on books is you can always find a wall to put a bookshelf, and like there's a place for it. So that to me, books aren't clutter.
yeah, I agree. Yeah. I've had to sort of change my perspective over the years, but I 100% agree because I went through a period a few years ago now that I was like, I want to be a minimalist because I'm so sick of all this junk in my home. And so we did get rid of so much stuff, but we got rid of probably about 1,000 books. And I don't regret anything else that I got rid of, like not at all. And I'm really happy that for the most part, we do not have that much crap. But I totally regret the books.
the funny thing is I remember when you did that, and I had the same thought, was like, well, I'll get rid of anything that I could get from the library really easily because it's right there.
Right. That
And
was my
then
thought too.
COVID hit
And
and
then
the
COVID
library
hit.
shut down.
Yep. Exactly. And that was the thing, because I got rid of them like about 6 months before COVID hit. And I was like, well, that was the stupidest thing ever.
So
So,
we as families were like trading books because
mhm.
we were so desperate for stuff to read.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not like we just didn't have any books, but I so regretted getting rid of those. And so I've been like slowly building back my library and re-getting those books that I had gotten rid of before. So if you're tempted to get rid of stuff, do, but don't get rid of books.
Yeah, not books.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah. The one other book that I wanted to, well, a couple of books that I wanted to bring up that I think fall pretty well into this category are the ones by E.B. White. So Trumpet of the Swan and Charlotte's Web, and even Stuart Little. They're all just.
Yeah, how are those not on that list?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, my kids love, I mean, at least Charlotte's Web. And I remember reading, what was the last one you just said?
Stuart Little.
Yeah, I remember reading that when I was a little kid, or my
Mhm.
mom reading it to me. But
Yeah, super fun.
yeah.
So,
yeah, I think Charlotte's Web was one of the first books that Audrey read on her own.
mhm.
And like in the car, she was just like tearing into it. It was so
Yeah,
cute.
so good.
Love it.
Awesome.
Okay, so what have you been reading?
I'm so excited to share this one. It's one that I had on my uh, holds forever, and I tried to find it at the library. I couldn't find it at the library. I got Hoopla, and it was just available. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. It's called The German Wife by Kelly Rimmer. And I've said before I would read anything by Kelly Rimmer. And I don't know if that's entirely true, but I would read any of her historical fiction. So The German Wife, it explores such a difficult thing, and it's one that I don't think is explored very much. So it's the parallel stories of a woman growing up during the Great Depression, several years before World War II. Her family lives in the part of Texas where they're being hit really hard by it's the Dust Bowl, and they eventually lose their farm. Her mother dies because of the dust storms. Her father actually commits suicide anyway, and so she's this very strong farmer girl and helping her brother through things, and he eventually enlists in the war, and he goes off to war, and so that takes place over the course of many years. The other story is the story of Sophie von Meyer-Rotz and her husband Jürgen, and it starts in 1930, and they meet, they fall in love. He's this brilliant scientist who loves rockets. And you're watching the Nazi party take over Germany and slowly but surely, impose all of their crazy edicts and laws and regulations. Sophie's best friend is a Jew whose family has fallen on hard times because of the Nazi takeover. And so Mayim, this friend, she lives with Sophie, and Sophie's husband, he's recruited by the Nazi party to work on their rocket program. And he's told that they just want to get rockets into space, but it becomes apparent very soon that they are actually wanting to build rockets to be bombs to destroy things. And Sophie's husband wants nothing to do with this. They want to leave, but he's brought in, and because they've tapped his home, they can hear everything that's going on. Anyways, so it really is this moral dilemma that you see them going through, that you realize, of course, there were lots of Germans who had to go through that. And there were some Germans who bought into the Nazi ideology, like hook, line, and sinker completely. They were totally indoctrinated, totally sold on this whole idea that Jews were bad and that the Nazi party was going to save them. And then there were others who were like, it was a self-preservation thing. It was like, because it wasn't just about them. They had families, they had children. It was like, okay, I am morally completely opposed to this, but if I resist, they are going to kill my children, and everybody who I love. And so it's like, what do? And after the war, and this did happen, a lot of the scientists were brought over to America, and they were sort of, their history was scrubbed, because some of them were actually SS officers, whether they wanted to be or not, and who's to say. So their histories were scrubbed, and they were brought on to the American rocket program, not to build bombs, but to actually get into space. And so they were, of course, met with a lot of prejudice and just hard things, being Germans coming over after the war and Americans being like, okay, you guys are responsible for the deaths of millions of people. And, we don't want you here, type of thing. You can't really blame them for feeling that way. Can you entirely blame the German families for doing what they had to do to survive? I don't know. And she doesn't like completely answer that question, but it makes you think about it. So it was really good.
I think I own that on my Kindle. But I
Do
haven't
you?
read it yet. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Or maybe even on Audible, which now that I know it's on Hoopla.
Yeah,
Dang
just
it.
go listen to it.
I'll have to go look and see where I have that.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome. I love Kelly Rimmer. And I like that you say, I'll read anything historical fiction. You've tried a couple of the others,
Mhm.
but for sure, her historical
Yeah.
fiction is excellent. Okay, so I'm reading Happier Hour by Cassie Holmes. And she is like a college professor that teaches classes on how to be happy. And
Okay.
that's like fascinating.
Yeah.
And so a couple things I've gotten from it is, one, you're happiest if you have between 2 and 5 hours of discretionary time in your day. If you have more than 5 hours,
Who has that?
I know, but if you have more than 5 hours, then your happiness declines because you have nothing to do. And less than 2 hours, which is what I have, is sad. So that's one thing to work on. I know. I just thought that, like, who has 2 to 5? But maybe you got to figure out how to put that in, right? Exercise. You think you don't have enough time to exercise, but when you take the time to exercise, you actually, it makes you happier, and you feel like you have more time because you're taking the time for yourself. So I love that. And another thing is, she talks about like how to be happier in the present time. And I loved this. Okay. So for instance, maybe eating dinner with your family. That's something that you probably do every day, right? She says, sit down and calculate how many more dinners you have with your family. Like, how many more dinners do you have with, say, Addie at home, or right? Or how, like, say you have dinner with your family, your parents once a month. Calculate how many you have left. And then you will be happier when you're eating dinner with them because you're aware of what, and she takes the idea of like, men live to be about 76, women live to be about 81. If you have this many dinners left, right? And like, that kind of made me think, my parents are turning 70 this year, and my dad has been through lots of health issues, and it's kind of amazing that he's with us. And so, like, I don't know, I don't like to talk about like something happening to them, but like, there's almost 70, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, they live 2 hours from us. And I just decided, I had actually thought about it before I read this book, but then when I read this book and read that little part, I was like, okay, we are meeting them halfway from like, so it's like an hour drive for each of us at least once a month to have dinner with, and all my kids are going to come. So they live close enough to see, but we don't go as often as we should. And so I'm like, we just have to set aside the time and just do it. And so we're gonna do the same thing with David's parents, try to have lunch or dinner with them once a month. They live 2 minutes from us. So we need to be intentional with.
I love that, because it's almost like she's trying to get you into the mindset of somebody who actually does realize their days are numbered. Like, we, and it's not to make light of it at all, but like somebody who has terminal cancer, they know that their days are very much numbered. And a lot of times they're the ones actually like cherishing their time and being a lot happier because they're like, we're going to make the most of this. And the rest of us like don't have that kind of perspective. And so we end up like twiddling away our time, wasting time, being dumb in lame pursuits. And it's like, so if you sort of force that perspective, it does cause us to be intentional. That's amazing.
Another idea was that she used to walk her son to preschool, and she didn't even realize in the last time that she did it or something that, you know, this was the last time or whatever. And she's like, even things like that, calculate how many times you have left to walk your child into kindergarten or whatever. And it just like, it sounds morbid, but like the idea that, oh, now I need to be present and like
be
enjoy
present,
this.
be grateful.
Because it won't be here forever.
Yeah.
Totally.
That,
Anyways,
that's amazing.
I really liked it. It was good. Interesting. I mean, I don't know, you know, nonfiction isn't as exciting, but sometimes you get something out of it that
absolutely. I think a lot of times it can
life-changing.
be totally very life-changing. So very good. We're so happy you joined us for this episode. We hope you will join us next week as we discuss Charles Dickens and give an introduction and setup for the next book we will be talking about, A Tale of Two Cities. If you have suggestions for books we should read and discuss, please email us at thebestbookspodcast@gmail.com. We would love it if you would leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts and share our podcast with your friends. We want to inspire and encourage as many people as we can to read out of the best books.
As Thoreau says, read the best books first, or you may not have a chance to read them at all. See you next week.